See, this is often what's misunderstood about the reading of the Prince. Notice, he says, temper what you do with prudence and humanity, so that too much trust may not render him imprudent, nor too much distrust render him intolerable. Paragraph 14. From this arises an argument, whether it's better to be loved than to be feared or the contrary. I reply that one should like to be both one and the other. But since it's difficult to join them together, it's much safer to be feared than to be loved when one of the two must be lacking. For one can generally say this about men. Now here's a cynical view of human nature, and this will sound very much like Hobbes' Leviathan, that they, humans, are ungrateful, fickle, simulators and deceivers, avoiders of danger, greedy for gain, and while you work for their good, they're completely yours, offering you their blood, their property, their lives, and their sons, as I said earlier, when danger is far away. But when it comes nearer to you, they turn away. And that prince who bases his power entirely on their words, finding himself stripped of other preparations, comes to ruin. He who builds on the people builds on mud. For friendships that are acquired by a price and not by greatness and nobility of character are purchased but are not owned. And at the proper moment, they cannot be spent. And men are less hesitant about harming someone who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared, because love is held together by a chain of obligation, which, since men are a sorry lot, is broken on every occasion in which their own self-interest is concerned. But fear is held together by a dread of punishment which will never abandon you. And then paragraph 15 to begin, a prince must nevertheless make himself feared in such a manner that he will avoid hatred, even if he does not acquire love, since to be feared and not to be hated can very well be combined. And this will also always be so when he keeps his hand off the property and the women of his citizens and his subjects. And he goes on to mention Hannibal as a classic example in paragraph 16. That is to say, the challenge then is to make sure that you are not hated. If you have to choose between being feared and being loved, which is the better way to go? We've often asked, as we did in our previous lecture on Machiavelli, which is the better parent? See, you guys were raised by typically two different types of parents. You know that your curfew is at 11:30, and at 11:15 you start heading home, and your pal says, "Dude, what's your problem?" "I got to get home. My curfew's 11:30. "Dude, what's the problem? So show up late. Who cares?" No. If I show up at 11:35, my stuff's going to be sitting out in the front lawn, or the door will be locked, and I won't be allowed in the house. See, there's some of us who are raised by that parent. There's others of us who are raised by the other parent. Some of you are smiling as I say this. Yeah, okay, they come to you and they say, "I know I said 11:30, and I know you came in at 11:40. Look, next time, come in." And of course, you're smiling for an obvious reason. Machiavelli would say you're smiling for an obvious reason. If you're afraid of that parent, you show up. Now, the obvious question is, can't there be a third way to be feared or to be loved? What about to be respected? And certainly, I think there's no question that when one is respected as a leader, one is maybe loved and a little bit feared. And certainly, we would say the same is true of parents as well, right? Of course, how you gain that respect is problematic, and certainly the reading of the Princes is one way to kind of get there. Part 5, that is to say, paragraphs 19 through 22, how a prince should keep his word, begins with these opening lines. How praiseworthy it is for a prince to keep his word and to live by integrity and not by deceit, everyone knows. Nevertheless, so you can see this comparison thing going. Nevertheless, one sees from the experience of our times, historical precedent, that the princes who have accomplished great deeds are those who have cared little for keeping their promises and who have known how to manipulate the minds of men by shrewdness. And in the end, they have surpassed those who laid their foundations upon honesty. That is to say, strategically being able to lie when you need to lie for the greater good, right? He continues over in paragraph 21, making the distinction between being a fox and being a lion. He says it this way: those who play only the part of the lion do not understand matters. A wise ruler has to be more fox-like, cannot and should not keep his word when such an observance of faith would be to his disadvantage, and when the reasons which made him promise are removed. If all men were good, this rule would not be good. But since all men are a sorry lot, and will not keep their promises to you, you likewise need not keep yours to them. A prince never lacks legitimate reasons to break his promises. Of this, one could cite an endless number of modern examples to show how many pacts, how many promises have been made null and void because of the infidelity of princes. And he who has known best how to use the fox has come to a better end. But it is necessary to know how to disguise this nature well, and to be a great hypocrite and a liar. And men are so simple-minded and so controlled by their present necessities that one who deceives will always find another who will allow himself to be deceived. And he then goes into the example of Alexander VI. The key here is the appearance of being a good prince. At one point in The Prince, of course, we have that classic example of a small town that's having problems. The prince invites in his henchmen and says, go figure it out. Round up the bad guys, kill them all in the public square to make sure everybody sees it. He does this. Horrific. Then, under cover of night, the prince shows up, goes to his henchman, kills him, has him hung and quartered in the center of the town, and the next morning, when everybody wakes up, there is the prince standing there to say, I sent my henchman to maintain peace. He acted without my authority, and for that I have punished him. Please welcome me as your leader. And now we have, of course, the leader being accepted. Whoa, the manipulation of a situation. Machiavelli will give that kind of situation a high five and say that's what a great leader has to be able to do. To finish in paragraph 24, a prince therefore must be very careful never to let anything slip from his lips which is not full of the 5 qualities mentioned above. He should appear upon seeing and hearing him to be all mercy, all faithfulness, all integrity, all kindness, all religion. Those are his big 5. Got to appear religious. And there is nothing more necessary than to seem to possess this last quality of being religious. And men in general judge more by their eyes than their hands. For everyone can see, but few can feel. Everyone sees what you seem to be, few perceive what you are, and those few do not dare to contradict the opinion of the many who have the majesty of the state to defend them. And in the actions of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no impartial arbiter, one must consider the final results. And in this regard, the ends justify the means, is how this is often translated. Let a prince therefore act to seize and to maintain his state. His methods will always be judged honorable and will be praised by all, for ordinary people are always deceived by appearances and by the outcome of a thing. And in the world there is nothing but ordinary people, and there's no room for the few, while the many have a place to lean on. Wow. Now, some will see this as just darkly, darkly cynical. Others will say, you know, I'm really upset to hear this kind of thing, but I mean, when I look at history, I got to ask the simple question, you know, what kind of leaders are the most effective ones? And Machiavelli almost seems to stand and smile. Well, at the very end now, part 6 on avoiding being despised and hated. This is paragraphs 23 through 25. The prince, here we'll learn, needs to be virtuous, but only seem to be, as we were saying. Appear. I'm sorry. I'm still giving you information for number 5. Prince needs to seem to be virtuous, appear to be merciful, faithful, as we said. He must avoid seeming changeable, frivolous, and effeminate, right, and cowardly or irresolute. Finally, the last passage, number 6, on avoiding being despised and hated, paragraphs 26 through 28. Danger, we learn here, to a prince can be external, from foreign powers, or internal, from subjects conspiring against him. Good troops and friends will prevail over external threats. Satisfying the people and avoiding their hatred will protect them from assassination and overthrow. Well, there it is. That's the prince, or at least our selection of it. What does this say for our big 5? Let's work 2A quickly now. Epistemologically, well, we got a pretty absolutist, especially in those aphorisms. You got to be certain about what's going on. Note the deep assumption, though, here, is that somehow epistemologically, maybe he's suggesting to the Medici that they should practice the fallibilist position. In other words, in the very writing of the prince, he's suggesting to the Medici, you might want to think about the epistemological positions you hold about leadership. So to that degree, epistemologically, I think that there's multiple levels of this to be read. Ontologically, well, we've already said this is a pretty dark, is it honest, view of human nature. This takes us back to some of those debates that we had in our study of Plato. Are humans inherently pretty nasty? There is, of course, an ontological argument that goes along with this that is a pretty postmodern view that says, ultimately, you're not born human, you're born mammalian, you're a mammal. And you choose to be human or not to be human at key moments. It's an interesting idea. Machiavelli might seem to suggest that, sometimes the prince has to become more mammalian and less human so that he can control situations. Well, what does this text say about psychology? We read this as a psychological text, and it's, of course, a brilliant treatment of the power of fear, anxiety. We think about Lord of the Flies and the way Jack is able to manipulate by dropping a rock on Piggy's head. I mean, think about that. You drop a rock on Piggy's head because he's obviously having problems with your leadership style, and all of a sudden all the younger kids are not going to mess with you, and you've taken out Ralph's one compatriot. Now you can go after Ralph. Powerful. Disturbingly powerful. What does this text say about sociology? Well, this may be the most disturbing component of our Big Five, in that he who builds on the people builds on mud. You've got to be able to manipulate people through lying, deception. You have to appear religious when in fact you're not at all, and all of those kinds of things. Is it really true that humans are this easily led? And for those of us that want to say, well, no, that's not true, well then how do you explain the horrors of the 20th century? What Hitler was able to do with the German people, what Stalin was able to do with the Russian people, what Mao Zedong was able to do with the Chinese people, and on and on and on it goes, right? Finally, what does this text say about theodicy and the idea of bad things happening in the world? He qualifies it as fortune. Bad luck sometimes happens the way it happens, and you just have to be prepared for it and adapt to it. Learn how to live with pain. Obviously, this will sound very similar to that. Why is this happening for me instead of to me? And 2A messages, well, it's obviously, the argument is here, better to be feared than to be loved. What makes the best parent? To be feared or to be loved, or to be respected, some of you will say. Another major message here is trust yourself, not the people. And of course, life is uncertain, so you better plan accordingly. At level 2B, the rhetorical and the use of comparisons, contrast, and the historical precedent is self-evident in our study here. But I want you to go back and see what are for you the 3 that are the most compelling of those examples from history. If we're asking about symbolism, fortune he will symbolize as a woman that has to be controlled, in fact beaten at times. It's a disturbing word picture, and yet the symbolism is definitely there. What about the symbolism of the lion versus the fox? And you got to learn how to be a fox, not a lion. We can think about, in comparisons in 3A already, the distinctions that we made in leadership style between the Odyssean and the Achillean style of approach to leadership. Achilles, if he's mad at you, he comes up and he tries to jack you. The Odyssean style is to say, hey, let's be friends and take a drive in the Badland, and don't worry about the shovel in the back of my pickup. That's for something else. Ooh, right? Of course, the irony at 2B is that Machiavelli wants the Medicis to trust him. This is often what's referred to as the slippery slope of Machiavelli's philosophy. In other words, okay, so sometimes you have to lie. But the question is, when does that take over? And of course, in our own nation's history, we have examples of this, where maybe presidents or leaders decided that they needed to have another lie, which led to another lie, which of course created all kinds of serious political problems, not only for them, but sometimes for the country, right? What about trust? It's another ironic question. If you're a good liar, how can you ever really trust anyone else? I mean, we immediately think of Shakespeare, we think of Iago, don't we? And of course Edmund and King Lear, as well as Macbeth. But, even more to the point, as we've sometimes pointed out, think about the fact of being a really great liar to your parents. Where are you going, honey? Oh, I'm going to X, when in fact you're going to Y. The only problem, as we said with that, is later in your life, when you become a parent, and you ask your son or daughter, where are you going? And they say, oh, I'm going to X. Are you going to be able to trust them? Because you were a really good liar and got away with it. Are you removing your ability to ever really trust your child later in your life if you continue to be a liar yourself? Machiavelli, I think, raises some interesting questions on the level of ethics and morals, no question. Let's jump to 3A. Well, obviously we can compare this, and we will, with what Lao Tzu has to say about what a great leader is. It almost seems antithetical in many ways. when we get to our Rousseau and our Jefferson and our Art a little bit later coming, we're going to pay attention to both of these two different views of governance. We've mentioned Plato's Thrasymachus from Republic, Book 1. Think about this when you go into our colleague's, Mr. Doer's room, our great history teacher here at Rowan High School. And there across the front, he has all of the presidents lined up, correct? Those pictures. It's a fascinating question to ask about each one. To sit down and do a quick biography of each one and to ask, were they more Machiavellian? Or did they follow some other kind of approach? And who were the most prepared for leadership? Beginning with, of course, George Washington, who was a man of war, right? What's your favorite movie about a great leader? What's your favorite biography of a great leader? I have students that decide after reading The Prince, you know what I'm going to do one summer is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read some of the most important biographies of great leaders to get a sense of how you should do it. Marcus Aurelius definitely comes to mind here in our study of governance as well, right? And you can put Marcus Aurelius against Machiavelli's views in The Prince and kind of see which one of those two do you more work with. Obviously, we've given lectures on Marcus Aurelius at LearnStrong.net in the AP folder. Finally, how are you going to relate to this in your own life? Does might make right? Just because you have the power to do something and get away with it, does that make it right? Okay. Or is there rather some sense of ultimate justice in our question in Plato's Republic? You'll remember in Republic 1, we asked this question. 4 guys go to rob a bank, one's in the car, the other 3 go in to rob the bank. When they come out with the goods that they've stolen, the one has run away, driven away. What will they say about that action? Well, that's not right. What do you mean it's not right? Dude, you're violating all kinds of sense of right and wrong. Oh, yeah. Or, for example, if one of the 4 steals the money, the other 3 will not say, well, you did it and got away with it. I guess that's the way the world works. No, they will usually use the language of morality. Hey, that's not right. You can't do that. How about this one? Can a good or a moral person survive in politics or in business? Or do you rather have to cut corners and be a shady person to be able to make it in the world of politics or economics? It's a very interesting question. Can you be a legit student without cheating? See? It's a fascinating. What would Machiavelli say? He would say, look, most of the time you shouldn't cheat, but sometimes you're going to have to cheat. So learn how to cheat and not get caught. Some of us will say, that's a pretty disturbing view, because of course, notice how that works, as we said many times in 303. When you're in a head-on collision and you got blood or swelling on your brain, and you go on under the knife, do you want the surgeon who cheated her way through med school, or the surgeon who really read the material and therefore can conduct the surgery well? See, it's funny how we're very conservative in this answer when it has to do with us or those we love. As we've already said, what about this problem of being a good liar or being a good cheater? We have to be able to trust anybody if you're a liar yourself. Of course, the question here in the end is, what kind of leader do you want? What kind of leader is most effective in your estimation? And can we ever have everything we want in a leader, do you think? Or in the end, do we have to settle for our leaders? These are all fascinating questions, which obviously lead to your own perspective of being either, maybe we would say, idealistic or realistic. And why do we always work in these dualities, as we said in our study of St. Augustine? We seem to constantly find ourselves always in these dualities. Or is Hegel more right in his reading of history? There is the thesis, the antithesis, and then there's somehow that dialectic or tension that produces the synthesis. Well, I leave it to you, and the next time you're at Rushmore, you can ask some really intriguing Machiavellian-like questions about those people in the rock. Thank you.